What did the second? Are you taking a break?
Everyone, please take their seats. Our next candidate is outside.
Two more.
Your attention, please. Thank you.
All right, everyone, can you please stop talking so we can move on?
Jennifer Wexton has served as state senator representing the state's 33rd district since 2014. Jennifer began her career as an assistant commonwealth's attorney for Loudoun County, prosecuting felony and misdemeanor criminal and traffic cases. She then went into practice in 2005, maintaining a pro bono focus on child neglect and mental health cases. In 2010, she was selected by the Chief Judge of the Loudoun Circuit Court to serve as a substitute judge of the District Court. I am pleased to introduce Senator Jennifer Wexton.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Wexton, and I'm delighted to be here with you this evening. I have to start with a confession. I'm not Jewish. I'm Catholic, which may be why I have to start with a confession. But my husband is Jewish, and we have a dual faith household. So, you know, my kids love lighting menorahs, and we have Seder dinners, and we celebrate both our faith's holidays in our household. And another thing I really haven't shared with a lot of people is you probably say Wexton. Well, that doesn't sound like a nice Jewish name. And it didn't start out as Wexton. It actually started out as Weishelbaum. And it did. And it went through a couple of different iterations. Once when my husband's great-grandfather came through Ellis Island, and again when his grandfather found that having a name like Wexelbaum at that point was not necessarily the best thing for business at a certain time in this country's history. So he changed it to Wexton, and that's how we became Wextons. So I am running for Congress for the Democratic nomination, and it still surprises me greatly to be here and running for Congress because quite honestly, I never planned to run for office at all. Which is an interesting thing to be saying since I'm the only person in this campaign who currently serves in elected office. But my path to elected service came through public service. I went to law school because I wanted to help people, and I was able to do that as a prosecutor in Loudoun County for a number of years. I was able to do it as an attorney and advocate for abused and neglected kids. I was able to do it as a member of the Community Services Board, helping to make sure that people in Loudoun County had access to mental health services. And I was even able to do it as a judge in our courts for a while. But in 2011, when our elected Commonwealth's attorney was using his office to reward his political friends and go after his enemies. And everybody agreed that this was a terrible thing and shouldn't be happening, but nobody was going to do anything about it. I decided I had to step up and run. I've been very inspired by, in 2008, Barack Obama's message of hope and change, and yes, we can. And I said, yes, I can. So I ran for Commonwealth's attorney in Loudoun County. And in hindsight, I don't know what I was thinking. Loudoun County is a big place, and I did not have a professional campaign operation. I had very little in the way of resources, but I had some very dedicated volunteers working with me. I had some homemade literature from the local print shop, and I had a great message about how Loudoun deserves somebody who was a prosecutor, not a politician. And so every weekend and many, many weeknights between April and Election Day, I went out and I knocked doors and I talked to voters across the district. So I talked to voters on front stoops and in living rooms and in community centers and all across the district. And in 2011, a year in which, and I'm obviously a Democrat, a year in which Republicans swept the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors 9-0, a year in which not a single Democrat was elected to the House of Delegates from Loudoun County, and only Mark Herring from the state Senate, I did not win. But I came within a couple points of taking out a two-term incumbent, and a lot of people took notice. And more important for me, I really started to take notice of what was actually going on down in Richmond. So I started paying a lot of attention, and for those of you who remember, this was in the 2012-2013 time frame, and Republicans had the majority in both houses of the General Assembly. Bob McDonnell was in the governor's mansion, and what did they do at that time? Well, voter suppression legislation, one of the most restrictive voter ID laws in the country. Repealing one of Virginia's very few pieces of sensible gun safety legislation, the one handgun a month law. And of course, who can forget the trans-patriarchal So in 2013, when Mark Herring was elected Attorney General, and the Republicans in Loudoun County were poised to nominate a candidate whose claim to fame was telling an anti-Semitic joke at a Ken Cuccinelli rally, I knew it was time to step up again. And so I ran for state senate, and this time I won. So I went down to Richmond and I got started legislating. Now I've been in the minority ever since I've been down there. Republicans have had the majority and I've been in the minority as a Democrat. So every single bill I passed has to be bipartisan. And I've had great success. I've passed over 40 bills by focusing on things that help kids and families. So I've had successful legislation to help combat the heroin and opioid crisis. Legislation to keep kids safer in daycares and online. Legislation to help stem the school-to-prison pipeline. And legislation to get more much-needed resources into the hands of victims of domestic violence. Fast forward to November 2016. After the incredibly divisive, hateful campaign of Donald Trump, and with the Trump administration, the policies that they have pursued, dividing us based on the God that we worship, or where we were born, or the color of our skin, I feel the need to step up again. And so I'm running for Congress. And I'm running for Congress because I know that we're better than this. I know that as Americans, we are held to a higher ideal, and that this is not the America that I know and love. This is not the America that all of our ancestors came here across great oceans against great odds to build a better life for. So it's going very well. The day after I announced my candidacy, the Quick Report nuclear rating for this race from Lean Republican to a toss-up, citing my entry into the race as the reason for doing so. We had a fantastic time in this district in 2017. The elections were amazing. People are engaged, they're involved, they're interested, and they're ready for a different kind of leader. So I am happy to answer any questions that you guys have, and I look forward to hearing what's on your minds.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. So I'm actually going to be asking questions. It's not just my mind. We took questions ahead of time with registration, so a lot of these questions are crowdsourced. So you touched upon the divisiveness and the negative rhetoric. In 2016, we've seen a rise in hate and bias crimes throughout the nation, in the Commonwealth, coming to a head with the tragedy in Charlottesville last summer. What would you do to create, to foster a more welcoming Commonwealth and nation?
The white supremacists marching in Charlottesville is absolutely anathema to what this country stands for. And it hasn't stopped there, by the way. We have had a couple times KKK literature being distributed in my hometown of Leesburg. So it's very, very worrisome what's going on. Increases in hate crimes, increases in incidents of that sort. I have fought back against discriminatory legislation and attempts to discriminate based upon, under the guise of religious freedom in the General Assembly. We have seen bills, for things like to allow people to discriminate based upon their religious beliefs, under the guise of religious beliefs, when really it's just discrimination. And so I have fought back against legislation like that, and thankfully we have not seen that pass in the General Assembly. But I will continue to fight against it, and I think at some point you just need, if you can't change their minds, you have to change their seats. And one of the things that is so wonderful about this district and about Northern Virginia is its diversity, and that is what makes us strong. And the interfaith communities here are one of the things that make it even stronger than it would be in the absence of it. So these are all the things that I have done and will do and will continue to do in Congress.
We're going to turn to another hot topic, gun violence prevention. I received many questions over email about what steps would the candidates take to prevent gun violence.
Gun violence is one of the greatest threats to our country and our young people that we are facing today. Parkland was a horrible tragedy, but to see the young people coming together and speaking up and rising up, it gives me faith that there will be changes and that things will change in the future. I have been fighting in Richmond for years for gun safety legislation, for things like universal background checks, closing the gun show loophole, banning bump stocks, and for things like red flag laws to take guns from people who are, due to mental illness or mental breakdown, are a danger to themselves or others. These are the same things that I will fight for in Congress. Barbara Comstock, on the other hand, has an A rating from the NRA and believes that the answer to gun violence is more guns in the hands of more people in more places. I am proud to be a Moms Demand Action Gun Sense candidate. I am proud to also be endorsed by the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence in this race. I have never taken a dime from the gun lobbies, and I never will.
Thank you. What experience do you have that would give you the skills to end the gridlock in Washington, and what strategies would you use?
As I mentioned, every single bill that I have passed in the General Assembly has been with bipartisan cooperation. And Washington is broken, there's no question about that. There is very little bipartisan cooperation, things aren't getting done. But I have managed in Richmond to get things done by focusing on issues that help kids and families. There are areas where we can find common ground. I have found it with things like helping to fight the heroin and opioid crisis that is gripping the nation, keeping kids safer in daycares online, things like that. This is a start. But also just communicating and reaching out across the aisle and finding where you can have common ground. So two of my colleagues from the Senate were elected to Congress in 2016. One, Donald McEachin, is a very progressive Democrat from the Richmond area. The other, Tom Garrett, is a gun-loving kind of, he would be a self-proclaimed good old boy from Louisa County. And they're very, very different, but they are able to work together and they have a cordial relationship, and they're looking for ways that they can work together to help Virginia. So that would be another thing that I would look at, is what sort of regional things can I do to help Virginia and help our economy here, to help grow the economy in Virginia.
A different topic. If elected to Congress, what do you see as your role regarding the U.S.-Israel relationship?
The U.S.-Israel relationship is unique. It is special. The U.S., has historically been the closest ally of Israel, and we need to definitely do whatever we can to cultivate that relationship and keep it strong. And I would certainly work very, very hard to do that throughout my tenure in Congress.
Kind of going back to creating a commonwealth, can you talk about your view on immigration, comprehensive immigration reform, and dreamers?
One of the things that's most disturbing to me about Donald Trump and the way that his administration is running is the vilification and targeting of immigrant populations. This is immigration. Immigration is one of the things that makes our country strong. It makes our country great. We need comprehensive immigration reform. There have been proposals, bipartisan proposals, to help fix America's broken immigration system before, and no one ever has the political will to do it. We need to make sure that our dreamers are protected and they have a path to citizenship. We need to make sure that families can be reunited. We need to make sure that people are allowed to come into this country to work. There have been decreases in the visas, and it's impacting our economy here. We need skilled workers for things for the tech industry, and we need agricultural workers for our agricultural communities. There was just information that Maryland crab processors are going to have a real problem because they can't get Americans to do these jobs, and they can't get visas for their seasonal workers who would come in and do these jobs every year. So the answer is not by slamming the door on immigrants. We're not just hurting them, we're hurting our country, so we need comprehensive immigration.
Let's talk about transportation. Something you've worked on. What are your thoughts on improving transportation in Virginia?
Transportation is one of the biggest issues. I'm sure it's something that's on all of your minds because I hear it all the time from my constituents. In the Senate, I serve on the Transportation Committee. I also serve on the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, so we do a lot of work on transit. For the first time in Virginia here in our last session, we came up with a dedicated source of capital funding for Metro. So much needed for this point going forward to make repairs and improvements to Metro to keep it safe, strong, and reliable into the next decade. So we're very, very pleased about that. The feds need to pick up their share of the tab. Metro moves the federal workforce, and the federal government needs to help share in the burden. DC, Maryland, and Virginia are all picking up our part of the tab. We were basically shaking off the sofa cushions to come up with money. We need the federal government to help as well. Also, we need to make sure that new roads are built. This is important. The federal government has really cut down on capital improvements, infrastructure expenditures, and this is something I think that is an important expenditure for our nation's viability, not just for roads, but also for rail, for high-speed broadband, for dams, bridges, roadways. These are things that A, create jobs, and B, makes our country better able to compete in the world.
I think we have time for one more question before our closing statement. What are your thoughts on campaign contributions, and what would you do to increase transparency in government?
There's too much money in politics. There are some things that we can do that would be very, very helpful. I think cutting down on or closing loopholes that allow unlimited amounts of undisclosed cash in the form of undisclosed money in the form of dark money would really go a long way to helping with our campaign finance issues. I have I have not taken any corporate PAC money during this campaign. I have pledged not to take Dominion money. And, you know, my vote can't be bought. But there's too much money in politics, and a lot of it comes from this dark money that isn't disclosed, that are these pop-up LLCs that are spending money, millions and millions of dollars for or against candidates or issues without any kind of disclosures or anything like that. So we need to close the loopholes that allow them to contribute unlimited amounts of money in these campaigns, because I think it's very dangerous for our democracy.
So by way of a 2-minute closing statement, what sets you apart from your opponents, and why should members of the Jewish community in particular vote for you?
What sets me apart is that I have the roots and the record to win in November. I have been living, working, and raising my family in CD10 for the last 2 decades. I have won 2 competitive elections in the district, both of them by over 10 points, and in both of those elections I have outperformed the other Democrats on the ticket. And it's not just that I can run and win competitive elections in the district, it's that I have shown that I have what it takes to govern once I get there. Even in the minority, I've managed to have a very successful legislative portfolio, and things that help kids and families. And finally, you know, I am great to represent the district because I am representative of the district. You know, I've got 2 kids in the public school system. I've been living here for years. I drive on these roads. I understand the issues that my constituents are facing. I know that we need an open, inclusive Virginia and an open, inclusive America. I will always remember who sent me here, and I believe that our job as elected officials is to do the most good for the most people. And I think that that's something that we all share as a value and believe the government should be doing. So thank you.
Finally, we have Paul Pelletier, who spent 27 years as a prosecutor with the Department of Justice. Paul Pelletier spent 27 years as a prosecutor for the Department of Justice, serving first as an assistant U.S. attorney in Miami before moving to Washington, D.C., rising to principal deputy chief in the Criminal Division's Fraud Section. During his tenure with DOJ, Paul led the Criminal Division's fraud enforcement efforts in the wake of the financial crisis in the late 1990s and recent debt and banking crises. He went into private practice in 2011. I'm pleased to introduce our final candidate, Mr. Paul Pelletier.
A 5-minute opening statement, and then we'll ask you some questions.
Sure. Oh, you guys are right on time. That's perfect. Thank you for having me. My father was a first-generation American, served in World War II, was a manager of Sears Roebuck. You kids don't remember what that is. But he brought up a large family. I have 10 brothers and sisters. I'll tell you more about that later. But he and my mom allowed me to have a sort of a commitment to justice, faith, and public service for my entire life. And it was during my grow-up years where I saw what elections meant to people. I saw that elections were sort of a reflection of who we are as Americans. Whether it be whether our priorities were national security, gun safety, environment, whatever it was, elections were a reflection of reality. And I knew instinctively that it wasn't reality TV. Because the government we elect has a direct and real impact on our lives. And that's why about 6 months ago, I decided there was more public service that I could do. You know, having been a federal prosecutor for more than 27 years, I actually saw what good government looks like. Every day of my career, I got to get up and just do what's right and take on, in a nonpartisan way, and hold accountable either people or powerful interests that did wrong. And that's why I'm running for Congress. Because in a way, I want to help fix and end the era of broken government. Now, I gotta tell you, for as long as I can remember, I fought a relentless battle just to do what's right for my country. I loved public service. And I just felt like I couldn't sit around any longer while these incompetent, selfish misfits in Washington drove our country into the ground. So I decided that I had a responsibility to stand up. And we all have a responsibility now to stand up in some way and just fight for what's right. And I'm telling you, when I get to Washington, I'm not just going to fight for what's right, because what's right is to fight for all of our kids, all of our families, our community, and our country. But we need people not just fight, people who know how to deliver, and people who know how to make a difference. How do you know that I'll fight? Well, I grew up in Massachusetts playing hockey. But that's not where I learned how to fight. I told you I had 10 brothers and sisters. 7 of them were sisters. We had one bathroom. So I learned early how to fight. But I also learned how to just do what's right and deliver. So when I was a prosecutor, I wouldn't just fight drug traffickers. I didn't stop the fight until I went to the Colombian cartel and got the drug lord dragged back into court and in jail. My last case, it took me 14 years to get him, but I got him. I also didn't stop then. I didn't stop until I took all of their money, because that's what my job was, because I was working for you. In my biggest drug seizure, I found his money. It took me 6 years, but I found his money. I found it in Switzerland, and it was $200 million in a bank account. And I had to work hard to get it. I didn't know at the time how much was I going to find. I didn't know that that seizure would make a Guinness Book of World Records as the largest drug cash seizure ever. But that was my J.O.B. And that's what I did every day. And then I didn't stop there. Then I wanted to get the bankers, and I put the bankers in jail, who helped them launder the money. And then after that, I didn't stop there. I made sure I fought and put the lawyers who helped them put their money in jail. And I'll tell you what, I fought some pretty dangerous people, but I never needed protection until I started fighting the lawyers. And that's the truth. What else did I do? I went after healthcare fraud with a vengeance. Now, at the time I was sent down to Miami, I was working healthcare fraud in Miami, it bothered me to no end that they were stealing the billions of dollars from healthcare, the medical clinics and the doctors in Miami, just in Miami. So I said, how do I make a difference? How do I solve this problem and make a difference? Well, I devised what's called a strike force. And the first strike force I built down there saved, in its first case, billions of infusion therapy, which are $1 billion a year. $1 billion. After our first strike force effort, went from $1 billion to zero. To zero. Why? Because it was all fraud. It was all fraud. So the FBI and the Department of Justice asked me to start these strike forces around America, around the country. Right? In 2007, we started 9 of them. And to this day, those strike forces are in place, and they are saving taxpayers over $10 billion. Now, nobody said, Paul, when you join the Department of Justice, you got to do that. And I just wanted to do what's right and make a difference. And that's what I did every day of my career. And then let's talk about one more thing, and then I'll let you ask questions. Corruption. I abhor corruption, both internationally and domestically. And when Jack Abramoff's case came on my plate, I made sure that not only did I prosecute Jack Abramoff, this corrupt lobbyist, but I made sure that I put him in jail, and then I went after the congressman he was corrupting. and I made sure Bob May went to jail. So I detest corruption, I detest corrupt lobbyists, and I will tell you this, the NRA is a corrupt lobbying organization. And I will go after them with the same vengeance, and I will hold hearings, and I will go after them with the same vengeance I went after Jack Moffat in Congress when he corrupted. So I promise you 3 things, and I'll answer all your questions tonight. That's my 4th promise. The first promise is, I will always tell you the truth. My second promise is that I will fight for what's right. Fight for what's right, because I've done that my entire career. And third, like I did every day of my public service in the Department of Justice, I will fight to deliver and make a difference. And I'll do that for you. Thank you.
Paul, thank you so much for being with us tonight. So you spoke about I'm going to be asking the questions actually. So we crowdsourced, people sent questions in ahead of time, so it's not just me. So you spoke about the NRA, gun violence prevention's on everyone's mind. What steps would you take to prevent gun violence?
Thank you for starting off with such an easy question. Okay, so for my entire public service career, I fought criminal violence on the street, whether it be drug trafficking violence, whether it be gun violence, whether it be violence that was part of sort of the crack epidemic in the late 80s and early 90s. I know what gun laws work, and I know what gun laws don't work. I will tell you this, when you hear the NRA says, we need to start enforcing the laws that are out there, that's BS. I spent my life trying to enforce that laws, and they're terrible. There are so many holes in it. Do you know that you can be prosecuted for trafficking in illegal salamanders, but you can't be prosecuted for trafficking in illegal guns? It's because the NRA prevents those laws from being enacted. So the first thing I'll do is make sure we get laws that work. The second thing I'll do is I'll take assault weapons off the street. Assault weapons need to be outlawed. The Second Amendment allows it. The Second Amendment permits it. We need to take them off the street. And the third thing I'll do, other than the bump stock and the high capacity magazines and the expanded background checks, I think the most important thing we can do is a national red flag statute. What's a red flag statute? A red flag statute is a statute that allows you to take a gun away from someone who poses a danger to himself and others. In the four states that were tested when these red flag statutes went into effect, in those 4 states, domestic violence murders went down 47%. That means, and by the way, you know who gets killed in domestic violence murders? Women. Went down 47%. Think about the number of lives they saved. So those are the 3 things I would do. And I would do them, and let me just say this. There is there can be bipartisan support for this. We need to deal with the NRA. We need to expose them, and I'll talk about at some point in time in my closing probably how to expose them. But we need to get American people and these wonderful kids who have actually acted like adults, and the people in Congress have acted like kids over this issue. We need to let them tell us what to do when they've already spoken. So 80% of Americans want responsible gun safety legislation. We need to pass it. And part of the way we pass this stuff is to expose the corruption of the NRA, and I'm ready to do that.
Okay, moving on to another really easy question. You said bipartisan. You didn't need to say bipartisan, but I'm going to ask you about it anyway. What practical experiences do you have that will allow you to be able to work in a bipartisan way and gridlock in Washington?
Can we stand up?
Please.
I'm a lawyer. So every door I knock on, this is absolutely the truth. Almost every door I knock on. Before people tell me they hate Bobby Comstock, or before people tell me that they hate guns, first thing they say is, government's broken. It doesn't work for me anymore. And I told you that one of the reasons why I run for office is I want to end the era of broken government. Government is broken. But let me just tell you about my job as a prosecutor, if I already told you. It's about finding solutions to problems in a non-partisan way. On my juries, there were Republicans Republicans, Democrats, people I couldn't even tell what they were, but, you know, they were like, people from, it was like a Star Wars bar sometimes. It was like, I had to get them to agree to one thing, one fact. That's not easy. But it's because the power of persuasion, when it revolves around the truth and facts, is pretty easy. I'm going to introduce the truth back into Congress. Now, the first thing I'll do, when I get to Congress, many of you may not know this, but there's a group in Congress called the Problem Solvers Caucus. Now, you may not know they exist because problems are never solved, but it's because they don't have enough power yet. There's only 20, and because Republicans are in power, to tell you the honest truth. But there's 20 Republicans and 20 Democrats in Congress called the Problem Solvers Caucus, and they meet once a week to talk, to meet, to find common ground. I will join that caucus. I want to make it 40 plus 40. I think that the problem with Congress right now has a lot to do with gerrymandering, and maybe we'll talk about that later on, I don't want to go into it. But at the end of the day, the American people deserve bipartisan, common ground being found so stuff can get done for that. Thank you.
So this whole evening has flown by really quickly. We actually only have about 8 minutes, so I'm going to get in a few more questions before your closing statement. So moving on to the international politics, what do you see as your role being related to the U.S.-Israel relationship?
Boom. Okay. Again, the U.S.-Israel relationship, I think was made worse today by virtue of what the president did unilaterally as it relates to the Iranian nuclear pact. But I think we have to make sure that Israel, which is the beacon of democracy in the Middle East, the only democracy, really, real democracy in the Middle East, the only place where fairness and justice always prevail in the Middle East, we have to make sure that Israel remains strong, remains our friend, and is empowered to be what they are, and that means to empower the military and to empower them as a democracy. I think we weaken them when we empower other countries like Iraq and Iran to wreak havoc in the Middle East. And so I think we need to have a president and a Senate and a House that checks the president to make sure that when he is making decisions, that these decisions are at least reviewed and called into question. One of the problems that I have with this president and a lot of what he does is there never seems to be a plan B. And that's where we go back to reality TV. That he thinks that because things worked on TV without a plan B, they can work here in this real world. And so I want to be a check on the president to do two things. One, to make sure that the truth is told to the American people. And two, to make sure he understands this is a real world with real world consequences with people. I know we're running out of time.
No, that's okay. I just want to get in on the questions. So I've asked all the other candidates. I've spoken about the rise in hate crimes, hate and bias crimes, negative rhetoric. There's been a huge rise in anti-Semitism recently. What would you do? What steps would you take to foster a welcoming commonwealth and nation?
Well, we all saw what happened in Charlottesville, and I think that it's the tone at the top that creates a lot of what we're seeing in America. It's the tone at the top. And we have to change the tone at the top. And I hate to keep going back to this, but we have to, as a Congress, this is why it's so important, and we have to take Congress back, and it starts right here in Northern Virginia, is that we need to be a check and balance on this president. We need to call him into account when he does things like saying in Charlottesville, both sides have a point in essence, which is not true. We have to stop the race baiting, we have to stop the faith baiting, and I think Congress has a real obligation to stand up and say something to stop that. I think we also need to enforce our anti-bias laws and our laws which actually have a higher penalty if people commit crimes for reasons that are related to race, religion, and sexual orientation.
Thank you. What ideas do you have to ease the transportation burden in Northern Virginia?
I used to say get a hybrid, but on 66. But so there are 3 levels of a solution to this problem. And there'll never be a perfect solution because there's only so many roads to get into the city or to get in and around town. The first thing I would do is I would make sure that Metro, and I know we've talked about, I know you've heard so much talk about a dedicated source of funding, we need that. But we need to have the federal government do their part as well. Almost, I'm going to say 70% of federal workers get to work on the Metro. They need to pull their full weight, not just in the operations budget, but in the budget to actually fix things that are wrong with the Metro. They need to dedicate that money. And it's going to take a dedication of about $50 million a year to do that. That's number one. Number one, guess what there is common ground for? Infrastructure. An infrastructure bill. When this president came into power, there was common, both sides wanted to do infrastructure. But they tabled that until they screwed up the taxes, until they tried to screw up your health care. So there is common ground for transportation, for a transportation infrastructure budget. And we need to put all our efforts into finding that common ground and improve our transportation infrastructure. The final thing that I would do that would help ease congestion, and that would be to create high-density zoning in and around the metro stops that they're building all throughout Fairfax and all the way out to Loudoun County. If we create high-density zoning around those metro stops, then what it does is it forces the people to use the metro instead of getting on the road in their cars. And so rather than putting these high-density communities 20, 30 miles away from the metro, if we're going to do it, we need to do it around metro stops, because that will force people to use the metro to come in and out of work. And gotta get rid of those tolls on 66.
So I'm sorry to say we've reached the end of our brief period, but in a 2-minute closing statement, can you describe what sets you apart from the other candidates and why the Jewish community, members of the Jewish community in particular, should vote for you?
This is like speed campaigning. Wow. So, look, like I told you, people just want the government to work for them. But we also need to elect leaders who can help the government work for them. Now, I want to tell you I have something in common with 2 people who got elected in moderate districts recently. Connor Lamb and Doug Jones. Now, there are a whole bunch of other factors too, sort of the anti-Trump thing and the Roy Moore affinity for kids. But the reason why moderate, problem-solving, career prosecutor Democrats were elected in those districts is because they had a profile and background that actually matched the district that they were elected in and ran in. And I will tell you this, whenever I go to see voters, it's far different what people ask for and want than when I go to see politicians. It's weird. At least I thought it was at first. Now I'm beginning to understand it because, as I told you, I'm not a politician. But people just want stuff to get done. And I will tell you, it's going to get done if we can get a Democrat elected and we can take back the Congress. And if we start doing bipartisan, problem-solving, common ground legislating. But if we elect someone who's just going to give red meat Democratic pablum to people, as opposed to appealing to the moderates and the independents in this district, Barbara Comstock's going to win. And we cannot expect just a blue wave. We have to have a blue wave that has purple water in it, pink water in it, and that's the way we will have a blue, pink, and purple tsunami. And that's the only way we're going to beat Barbara Comstock. I offer that. I'm a hunter. I was a cop. I'm not afraid of guns, and I'm not trying to take away people's guns and violate the Second Amendment. I can convince hunters and independents and moderates that I'm not there to do that. I'm there to protect the Second Amendment. All these reforms I've talked about help that. I'm also the only candidate that He's actually driven down healthcare costs. And I've taken on big pharma. Finally, the NRA. I say that only because it's very important. Because they're the ones that died and come on this country. I don't know if you know this, but we need to hold hearings on them tomorrow. They are taking money from Russians. And a lot of money. And no one's talking about it. And I want to ask you this way. Their biggest benefactor is a friend of Putin's, okay? And we need hearings on this because we need to expose this corruption. How many of you think that the Russians want a second amendment in Russia? No. So why are they giving money to the United States and to the NRA? Because they want to destabilize our country, believe it or not. And they want to keep selling us their AK-47s. We need to stop that. We need to expose them for the corrupt entity that they are. And I just want to hold our politicians accountable, and I want to do that for you, and I think I'm the most elected to do that. Thank you.